You're looking at live pictures there of the presidential palace in Helsinki, where we're waiting for the US President Donald Trump and his counterpart, Russia's Vladimir Putin, to arrive and come out into that press conference. They met earlier today for what's being described a historic summit, which took place for about 90 minutes. And my colleague Christian Fraser was saying there that this was a meeting that had no agenda. It really was a freewheeling session. Let's just go back live now to Christian. Christian, that press conference is about to begin, and it really will be the first time that we'll be able to hear what was on the agenda when the two leaders met.
Yes, very much so. It was the White House that requested the one-on-one with only the translators present. It is unorthodox. There is no draft communique ahead of this meeting. There's no prescribed agenda, and I think that is what concerns President Trump's own side. They saw what happened in Singapore in this meeting with Kim Jong-un. He came out shortly after declaring that he was ending military exercises on the Korean Peninsula. That was a giveaway to the North Korean leader for not very much in return, and it was news to the South Koreans, it was news to the Pentagon. I would dare say that General Kelly, the Defense Secretary, doesn't want any surprises like that in the course of the next hour. There are areas where they could possibly find agreement quite quickly. The New START Treaty, the nuclear accord that President Obama signed in 2011 is one possible area. It could be extended up to 5 years, and that would go a long way to minimizing a nuclear arms race. It gives the two sides inspections in each other's country. There is data sharing, and if they were to agree that would be an easy win. But if there were concessions in terms of Crimea, in terms of sanctions, in terms of Americans withdrawing from Syria unilaterally, that would be, I think, seen in not a good light by many Republicans back at home. But it's interesting, the silence that we've had from Republican leaders, not just over the way he went into this meeting, but generally over the way he's turned the tables in Europe and at NATO in recent days. Very little from the Republican side. The only criticism you've heard is from minority leaders of the committees on the Hill, who asked him not to go into this on a one-on-one basis with the Russian president.
Christian, thanks so much for all the very latest there from Helsinki. We're waiting for that press conference to begin. Let me hand over to my colleague Matthew, who will bring us all the very latest here on BBC World News. Matthew.
Yaudo, thanks very much. And let's stay with these live pictures because you can see the scene very much set. I don't think we're that far away from the start of this joint news conference. And Christian there also watching events and has been watching the events for the last few hours. And Christian, we wait to hear just the formal statements, and then it will be intriguing the sorts of questions the two presidents are asked, most notably about the allegations of Russian meddling in the US elections. That'll be fascinating to hear from both the two leaders. But in terms of the style, the optics of what you've seen so far, what have you made of it?
Well, much of the same from Donald Trump, the same swagger that we saw on the way into the meeting with Kim Jong-un in Singapore, to be honest, Matthew. Mr. Trump backing himself as a deal maker, that sort of transactional way that he does business, wanting to get the measure of the Russian president. But I was saying to Yelda that the danger with that is that other American leaders have tried that before and failed. George W. Bush, who notably said, "I looked into his eyes and I saw into his soul," and he got very little out of Vladimir Putin. He's an ace at this, the Russian president. He's been trained by the KGB. He knows how to negotiate, how to speak warmly to people, to tell them the sort of things that they want to hear, but then to play his own agenda and to extract exactly what he wants from the meeting. And I think there is a concern in the Republican side, listening to commentators today, of course criticism from the Democrat side, but concern within the Republicans that he's gone into this ill-prepared, that he might give something away strategically without very much in return. But above all, the president resetting the relationship without a change of behaviour from the Russian side. This is, for Vladimir Putin, a win, whatever comes out of the meeting, because whether it's Crimea, whether it's Syria, whether it's the downing of a Malaysian Airlines plane over Ukraine, whether it's Novichok in Salisbury, he's had to give nothing in return for a very high-profile meeting with the American president, and on the back of all the criticisms there have been in the past week of NATO and the EU.
Christian, I was reading one Russian analyst a couple of hours ago saying it was a success for Putin even to have this conference, whatever comes out of it. What represents a success, do you think, for Donald Trump?
Well, I think he will hail it as a success, whatever comes of it, because he has said throughout the campaign and in recent weeks that it's much better to talk to people than to let the relationship fester and not get anything out of it. So if he can build a relationship with Vladimir Putin, he will hail that as a success, and I think that is a good thing for the world. It is a good thing that he's talking to Kim Jong-un. But the problem is he's not getting anything out of these relationships at the moment. He's telling us that there is a relationship to build good things out of it, but at the moment we've not seen any sort of example, certainly not from the North Korean negotiation, that he's getting results. And of course, I was saying to Yelda, you know, when he came out of the meeting in Singapore, he told the Pentagon, he told the South Koreans they were stopping the military exercise, and that was very much a surprise to both sides. If he does that today, you're going to hear howls of dismay from congressmen on the Hill that he's done that without getting anything in return.
Well, Christian, we will wait to see in terms of the content and anything concrete in terms of those announcements from the two leaders. What else are you keeping your eye on? Because Crimea, obviously, a lot of focus on that. Obviously, as I already mentioned, the stuff around Russian meddling in the US elections. But you also have that huge issue of Syria. What is the best that Donald Trump can push Vladimir Putin in terms of the relationship on Syria?
Well, I mean, the be-all and end-all, of course, for Donald Trump, and the reason he pulled out of the Iran agreement, of course, the nuclear agreement in Iran, is he wants to isolate Iran and he wants to force them out of Syria. He's probably not going to get his way on that, but he has said before that he wants to pull American troops out of Syria as soon as he can. There's around 2,000 American troops currently in Syria, in the northern part of the country, facing the remnants of so-called Islamic State. But as we know, there's been a big push by the Assad regime into the southwest of the country, bordering the Golan Heights and Jordan. And it remains to be seen what sort of agreement they can come to on the role of Iran. Interestingly, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, he was in the Russian capital just the other day. It's the third time he's visited since the spring, and what he wants out of it is Iran to be kept 50 miles back from the border, from the Golan Heights, so that you know, there isn't a coming together between the Iranian and the Israeli forces. But in terms of what leverage the American president has in Syria, I think it's widely acknowledged now that the Americans
Christian,
have,
I'm just going to cut across you, because as you're speaking, just inside the palace, as we wait for the news conference, some sort of protest, some sort of disturbance with somebody with a piece of paper that he was waving, being surrounded and now being ushered out of that room. But a flurry of activity there. I'm sure in the next few moments we'll learn more of the details about what exactly that protest was, but you can see that person being now led away, still shouting out to the cameras, but well, pretty speedily, I would say. That's about 60 seconds since we first saw that man now just being ushered out of the room. We were talking, Christian, about the Russian denials about meddling in the US elections, and we will see what Donald Trump says about that and what he has actually said to Vladimir Putin on that issue. But there are those also urging Donald Trump to push the Russians on the use of Novichok, the nerve agent, in the UK. And of course, you've had furious denials from the Russians over that, and yet Donald Trump expelled 60 or so Russian intelligence officials from the US. So that's interesting, isn't it, in terms of how the Americans have reacted on those two different issues and those two different sets of denials.
Yeah, but I think there has been a disconnect generally, Matthew, in the way the administration has approached Russia and the way Donald Trump approaches Vladimir Putin. I mean, if you look back since 2017, there's something like 200 Russian targets that have been sanctioned. They supplied defensive lethal weapons to the Ukrainian forces in their fight against Russian-backed forces in Ukraine. They closed down the Russian consulate in San Francisco. They expelled those 60 diplomats, as you say, after the Novichok incident, and they've taken a generally tough line within NATO on Russia. And so when President Putin says no one's taken a tougher line on Russia than me, to all intents and purposes he is right. But what baffles people is the lack of criticism of the man who is driving all this, and that is Vladimir Putin. He seems loath, for some reason, and nobody really understands why, to criticize the Russian president, and that's what sets him at odds even within those closest to him in his administration, the likes of John Bolton, who's most certainly a hawk when it comes to Russia, or Mike Pompeo, who was instrumental within the CIA in uncovering what the Russians had done during the 2016 elections. And that, I think, will be the general focus of this press conference that's coming up. What sort of relationship is there between the two men? And is there any criticism whatsoever of the Russian president from his American counterpart? Let's bring in Dr. Michael Carpenter, who is Senior Director of the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement. Dr. Carpenter, it's good to have you with us. The one thing that strikes me when we watch this press conference is we will get an account of what happened from both men, but will we ever get a proper readout of what was discussed?
No, we won't. And that is the big mystery here, is that why has President Trump decided to exclude Secretary Pompeo, John Bolton, and his Chief of Staff, John Kelly, from this meeting? What is it that he's going to discuss with Vladimir Putin that he wants to discuss only one-on-one without any of his key staff present and without the American public ever being able to know? I mean, that's the key question. We'll never know the answer to that.
When you look back in history, Ronald Reagan called Russia the evil empire, and he really began the discussions with Gorbachev from a position of strength. This time, it seems to be the other way around.
Precisely. Normally, a summit between two presidents at this level is conducted with months and months of very careful preparation and some sort of what we call in government deliverables. In other words, something that the leaders can point to, that they've achieved, that is concrete, that they can sell to their publics as the outcome of the meeting. But that's always done in advance. It's sort of pre-cooked, if you will. And in this case, there are no deliverables. Okay. Russia has not agreed to release any political prisoners, for example.
Okay. Dr. Michael Carpenter, I'm going to cut across you because the two men are at the podium. Let's listen in.
Мы можем начать работать, так я понимаю. Уважаемый господин президент, дамы и господа, переговоры с президентом Соединенных Штатов Америки, господином Дональдом Трампом, прошли в откровенной и деловой атмосфере.
Mr. Donald Trump were held in an open and candid atmosphere. They were very successful and useful. We considered current situation and prospects of their Russia-US relations and the key questions on the agenda. Everyone agrees that our relations are going through a difficult phase, and there are no objective reasons to justify the strenuous relationships. The Cold War ended, and the era of ideological confrontation is in the past. Today, both Russia and the US are facing completely different challenges. A dangerous disbalance in international relations, regional crisis, international criminality, economic problems, ecological problems and risks. And we can only manage all of those through joint effort. Today's negotiations reflected our mutual desire to improve the situation, to set the first steps for improving our relations and for coming back to the previous levels of international understanding. As the largest nuclear powers, we bear particular responsibility for international safety. And we believe it is important to reinstate strategic level dialogues on all levels. As largest nuclear powers, we are responsible for international security. We believe it is important to start the dialogue for strategic stability and non-proliferation of arms. And we have passed a number of specific proposals to President Trump on this matter. We believe it is necessary to continue our joint work on all areas of the military cooperation, handling the situation in relation to the ballistic protection program and also placing armaments in space. We would like to continue our cooperation in the area of fighting international terrorism, and I would like to point out that our special services are working quite successfully, and our most recent successful example is our cooperation with American experts within the framework of the World Cup, which ended yesterday. And also it is important to move to a systematic mutual cooperation in the area of international security. It's important to note that our positions are not identical in many areas. However, we've got many overlapping interests. We also discussed about regional crisis. We talked about Syria. In relation to Syria, resolving the situation in Syria could become an example of how international conflicts can be removed and settled. And we could cooperate in the area of removing humanitarian crisis in the area. We have all necessary ingredients in order to continue our cooperation on settling the conflict in Syria. Что позволило не допустить опасных инцидентов и непредсказуемого столкновения на поле боя, в воздухе и на земле. Хотел бы также отметить, что после завершения окончательного разгрома террористов на юго-западе Сирии, в так называемой южной зоне, ситуация на голландских высотах должна быть приведена в полное соответствие с соглашением 1974 года о разъединении
compliance with the Treaty of 1974 about the separation of forces, of Israel and Syria. This will bring peace to Golan Heights and bring a more peaceful relationship between
Израиль. Господин президент уделил этому сегодня особое внимание. Хочу подтвердить, что Россия заинтересована в таком развитии событий и будет придерживаться именно такой позиции. Таким образом будет сделан Направление установления справедливого и прочного мира на основе резолюции 338 Совета Безопасности Организации Объединенных Наций.
In compliance with the respective resolutions of Security Council, for instance, the resolution 338, we're glad that the Korean Peninsula issue is starting to resolve. To a great extent, it was possible thanks to the personal engagement of President Trump, who opted for dialogue instead of confrontation. We also mentioned our concern about the withdrawal of the United States from the JCPOA. Well, our US counterparts are aware of our posture. Let me remind you that thanks to the Iranian nuclear deal, Iran became the most controlled country in the world. It's submitted to the control of IAEA. It effectively ensures the exclusively peaceful nature of Iranian nuclear program and strengthens the non-proliferation regime. While we discussed the internal Ukrainian crisis, we paid special attention to the bona fide implementation of Minsk agreements by Kiev. At the same time, the United States could be more decisive in nudging the Ukrainian leadership and encourage it to work actively in this. We paid more attention to economic ties and economic cooperation. It's clear that both countries, the businesses of both countries, are interested in this. American delegation was one of the largest delegations on the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. It featured over 500 representatives of American businesses. We agreed, me and President Trump, we agreed to create a high-level working group that would bring together captains of Russian and American business. After all, entrepreneurs and businessmen know better how to articulate this successful business cooperation. We'll let them think and make their proposals and suggestions in this regard. Once again, President Trump mentioned the issue of the so-called interference of Russia in the American elections, and I had to reiterate things I said several times, including during our personal contacts, that the Russian state has never interfered and is not going to interfere into internal American affairs, including election process. Any specific material, if such things arise, we are ready to analyze together. For instance, we can analyze them through the joint working group on cybersecurity, the establishment of which we discussed during our previous contacts. And clearly, it's past time we restore our cooperation in the cultural area, in the humanitarian area. As far as I think you know that recently we hosted the American Congressman delegation, and now it's perceived and portrayed almost as a historic event, although it should have been just the current affairs, just the business as usual. And in this regard, we mentioned this proposal to the President. We have to think about the practicalities of our cooperation, but also about the rationale, the underlying logic of it. And we have to engage experts on bilateral relationship who know history and the background of our relationship. The idea is to create an expert council that would include political scientists, prominent diplomats and former military experts in both countries who would look for points of contact between two countries, that would look for ways on putting the relationship on the trajectory of growth. In general, we are glad with the outcome of our first full-scale meeting, because previously we only had a chance to talk briefly on international fora. We had a good conversation with President Trump, and I hope that we start to understand each other better, and I'm grateful to Donald for it. Clearly, there are some challenges left when we were not able to clear all the backlog, but I think that we made the first important step in this direction. And in conclusion, I want to point out that this atmosphere of cooperation is something that we are especially grateful for to our Finnish hosts. We're grateful
both of our countries.
Finnish people.
We had direct, open, deeply productive dialogue. Went very well. Before I begin, I want to thank President Niinisto of Finland for graciously hosting today's summit. President Putin and I were saying how lovely it was and what a great job they did. I also want to congratulate Russia and President Putin for having done such an excellent job in hosting the World Cup. It was really one of the best ever, and your team also did very well. It was a great job. I'm here today to continue the proud tradition of bold American diplomacy. From the earliest days of our republic, American leaders have understood that diplomacy and engagement is preferable to conflict and hostility. A productive dialogue is not only good for the United States and good for Russia, but it is good for the world. The disagreements between our two countries are well known, and President Putin and I discussed them at length today. But if we're going to solve many of the problems facing our world, then we're going to have to find ways to cooperate in pursuit of shared interests. Too often in both recent past and long ago, we have seen the consequences when diplomacy is left on the table. We have also seen the benefits of cooperation. In the last century, our nations fought alongside one another in the Second World War. Even during the tensions of the Cold War, when the world looked much different than it does today, the United States and Russia were able to maintain a strong dialogue. But our relationship has never been worse than it is now. However, that changed as of about 4 hours ago. I really believe that. Nothing would be easier politically than to refuse to meet, to refuse to engage, but that would not accomplish anything. As president, I cannot make decisions on foreign policy in a futile effort to appease partisan critics or the media or Democrats who want to do nothing but resist and obstruct. Constructive dialogue between the United States and Russia affords the opportunity to open new pathways toward peace and stability in our world. I would rather take a political risk in pursuit of peace than to risk peace in pursuit of politics. As president, I will always put what is best for America and what is best for the American people. During today's meeting, I addressed directly with President Putin the issue of Russian interference in our elections. I felt this was a message best delivered in person. Spent a great deal of time talking about it, and President Putin may very well want to address it, and very strongly, because he feels very strongly about it, and he has an interesting idea. We also discussed one of the most critical challenges facing humanity, nuclear proliferation. I provided an update on my meeting last month with Chairman Kim on the denuclearization of North Korea, and after today, I am very sure that President Putin and Russia want very much to end that problem, going to work with us, and I appreciate that commitment. The President and I also discussed the scourge of radical Islamic terrorism. Both Russia and the United States have suffered horrific terrorist attacks, and we have agreed to maintain open communication between our security agencies to protect our citizens from this global menace. Last year, we told Russia about a planned attack in St. Petersburg, and they were able to stop it cold. They found them, they stopped them, there was no doubt about it. I appreciated President Putin's phone call afterwards to thank me. I also emphasized the importance of placing pressure on Iran to halt its nuclear ambitions and to stop its campaign of violence throughout the area, throughout the Middle East. As we discussed at length, the crisis in Syria is a complex one. Cooperation between our two countries has the potential to save hundreds of thousands of lives. I also made clear that the United States will not allow Iran to benefit from our successful campaign against ISIS. We have just about eradicated ISIS in the area. We also agreed that representatives from our national security councils will meet to follow up on all of the issues we addressed today and to continue the progress we have started right here in Helsinki. Today's meeting is only the beginning of a longer process, but we have taken the first steps toward a brighter future and one with a strong dialogue and a lot of thought. Our expectations are grounded in realism, but our hopes are grounded in America's desire for friendship, cooperation, and peace. And I think I can speak on behalf of Russia when I say that also. President Putin, I want to thank you again for joining me for these important discussions and for advancing open dialogue between Russia and the United States. Our meeting carries on a long tradition of diplomacy between Russia, the United States, for the greater good of all. And this was a very constructive day. This was a very constructive few hours that we spent together. It's in the interest of both of our countries to continue our conversation, and we have agreed to do so. I'm sure we'll be meeting again in the future, often, and hopefully we will solve every one of the problems that we discussed today. So, again, President Putin, thank you very much.
Господа президенты, сейчас журналисты смогут задать по 2 вопроса, российские и американские. Мы начинаем с российских журналистов, с кремлевского пула. Пожалуйста, прошу вас, представляйте.
Здравствуйте. Меня зовут Алексей Мешков, я представляю информационное агентство «Интерфакс». У меня вопрос к господину президенту Соединенных Штатов. Во время своего недавнего европейского турне вы сказали, что реализация трубопроводного проекта «Северный поток-2» и других проектов делает Европу заложницей России.
First, the Russian journalist will ask the question. Please give your affiliation. Good afternoon. My name is Alexei Meshkov, Interfax Information Agency. I have a question to President Trump. During your recent European tour, you've mentioned that the implementation of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline makes Europe a hostage of Russia, and you suggested that you could free Europe from this by supplying American LNG. But this cold winter actually showed that the current mechanism of supply of fuel to Europe is quite viable. At the same time, as far as I know, US had to buy even Russian gas for Boston. I have a question. The implementation of your idea has a political tinge to it, or is it a practical one? Because there will be a gap formed in the supply and demand mechanism, and first it's the consuming countries who will fall into this gap. And the second question, before the meeting with President Putin, you called him an adversary, a rival, and yet you expressed hope that you will be able to bring this relationship to a new level. Did you manage to do this?
No, actually, I called him a competitor, and a good competitor he is. And I think the word competitor is a compliment. I think that we will be competing when you talk about the pipeline. I'm not sure necessarily that it's in the best interests of Germany or not, but that was a decision that they made. We'll be competing. As you know, the United States is now, or soon will be, but I think it actually is right now the largest in the oil and gas world. So we're going to be selling LNG, and we'll have to be competing with the pipeline. And I think we'll compete successfully, although there is a little advantage locationally. So I just wish them luck. I mean, I did. I discussed with Angela Merkel in pretty strong tones, but I also know where they're all coming from, and they have a very close source. So we'll see how that all works out. But we have lots of sources now, and the United States is much different than it was a number of years ago when we weren't able to extract what we can extract today. So today we're #1 in the world at that, and I think we'll be out there competing very strongly. Thank you very much.
If I may, I throw in some 2 cents. We talked to Mr. President, including this subject as well. We are aware of the stance of President Trump, and I think that we, as a major oil and gas power, and the United States is a major oil and gas power as well, we could work together on regulation of international markets, because neither of us is actually interested in the plummeting of the prices, and the consumers will suffer as well, and the consumers in the United States will suffer as well, and the shale gas production will suffer, because beyond a certain price bracket it's no longer profitable to produce gas. But nor we are interested in driving prices up, because it will drain juices, life juices, from all other sectors of the economy, from machine building, etc. So we do have space for cooperation here, as the first thing. Then about the Nord Stream 2. Mr. President voiced his concerns about the possibility of disappearance of transit through Ukraine, and I reassured Mr. President that Russia stands ready to maintain this transit. Moreover, we stand ready to extend this transit contract that is about to expire next year, in case if the dispute between the economic entities will be settled in the Stockholm Arbitration Court.
The first question from a U.S. journalist goes to Jeff Mason from Reuters.
Thank you. Mr. President, you tweeted this morning that it's U.S. foolishness, stupidity, and the Mueller probe that is responsible for the decline in U.S. relations with Russia. Do you hold Russia at all accountable for anything in particular? And if so, what would you consider them that they are responsible for?
Yes, I do. I hold both countries responsible. I think that the United States has been foolish. I think we've all been foolish. We should have had this dialogue a long time ago, a long time, frankly, before I got to office. And I think we're all to blame. I think that the United States now has stepped forward along with Russia, and we're getting together, and we have a chance to do some great things, whether it's nuclear proliferation in terms of stopping. We have to do it. Ultimately, that's probably the most important thing that we can be working on. But I do feel that we have both made some mistakes. I think that the probe is a disaster for our country. I think it's kept us apart. It's kept us separated. There was no collusion at all. Everybody knows it. People are being brought out to the fore. So far that I know, virtually none of it related to the campaign, and they're going to have to try really hard to find somebody that did relate to the campaign. That was a clean campaign. I beat Hillary Clinton easily, and frankly, we beat her, and I'm not even saying from the standpoint, we won that race, and it's a shame that there can even be a little bit of a cloud over it. People know that, people understand it, but the main thing, and we discussed this also, is zero collusion, and it has had a negative impact upon the relationship of the two largest nuclear powers in the world. We have 90% of nuclear power between the two countries. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous what's going on with the probe.
For President Putin, if I could follow up as well, why should Americans and why should President Trump believe your statement that Russia did not intervene in the 2016 election, given the evidence that U.S. intelligence agencies have provided? And will you consider extraditing the 12 Russian officials that were indicted last week by a U.S. grand jury?
Well, I'm going to let the President answer the second part of that question. But as you know, the whole concept of that came up perhaps a little bit before, but it came out as a reason why the Democrats lost an election, which, frankly, they should have been able to win, because the Electoral College is much more advantageous for Democrats, as you know, than it is to Republicans. We won the Electoral College by a lot, 306 to 223, I believe, and that was a well-fought battle. We did a great job, and frankly, I'm going to let the President speak to the second part of your question. But just to say it one time again, and I say it all the time, there was no collusion. I didn't know the president. There was nobody to collude with. There was no collusion with the campaign. And every time you hear all of these, 12 and 14, it's stuff that has nothing to do, and frankly, they admit, these are not people involved in the campaign. But to the average reader out there, they're saying, well, maybe that does. It doesn't. And even the people involved, some perhaps told mis-stories, although in one case the FBI said there was no lie. There was no lie. Somebody else said there was. We ran a brilliant campaign, and that's why I'm president. Thank you.
As to who is to be believed and to who is not to be believed, you can trust no one if you take this. Where did you get this idea that President Trump trusts me or I trust him? He defends the interests of the United States of America, and I do defend the interests of the Russian Federation. We do have interests that are common. We are looking for points of contact. There are issues where our postures diverge, and we are looking for ways to reconcile our differences, how to make our effort more meaningful. We should not proceed from the immediate political interests that guide certain political powers in our countries. We should be guided by facts. Could you name a single fact that would definitively prove the collusion? This is utter nonsense. Just like the President recently mentioned. Yes, the public at large in the United States had a certain perceived opinion of the candidates during the campaign, but there's nothing particularly extraordinary about it. That's a usual thing. President Trump, when he was a candidate, he mentioned the need to restore the Russia-US relationship, and it's clear that a certain part of American society felt sympathetic about it, and different people could express their sympathy in different ways. But isn't that natural? Isn't it natural to be sympathetic towards a person who is willing to restore the relationship with our country, who wants to work with us? We heard the accusations about the Concord country. Well, as far as I know, this company hired American lawyers, and the accusations doesn't have a fighting chance in the American courts. So there's no evidence when it comes to the actual facts. So we have to be guided by facts and not by rumors. Now, let's get back to the issue of these 12 alleged intelligence officers of Russia. I don't know the full extent of the situation, but the President Trump mentioned this issue, and I will look into it. So far, I can say the following. The things that, off the top of my head, we have an existing agreement between the United States of America and the Russian Federation, an existing treaty that dates back to 1999, the mutual assistance on criminal cases. This treaty is in full effect. It works quite efficiently. On an average, we initiate about 150 criminal cases upon requests from foreign states. For instance, the last year, there was one extradition case upon the request sent by the United States. So this treaty has specific legal procedures. We can offer that the appropriate commission headed by Special Attorney Mueller, he can use this treaty as a solid foundation and send an official request to us so that we would interrogate, we would hold a questioning of these individuals who he believes are privy to some crimes. And our law enforcement are perfectly able to do this questioning and send the appropriate materials to the United States. Moreover, we can meet you halfway, we can make another step. We can actually permit official representatives of the United States, including the members of this very commission headed by Mr. Mueller, we can let them into the country and they will be present at this questioning. But in this case, there's another condition. this kind of effort should be a mutual one. Then we would expect that the Americans would reciprocate, and they would question officials, including the officers of law enforcement and intelligence services of the United States, whom we believe who have something to do with illegal actions on the territory of Russia. And we have to request the presence of our law enforcement. For instance, we can bring up Mr. Browder in this particular case. Business associates of Mr. Browder have earned over $1.5 billion in Russia. They never paid any taxes, neither in Russia nor in the United States. And yet the money escaped the country. They were transferred to the United States. They sent a huge amount of money, 400 million, as a contribution to the campaign of Hillary Clinton. Well, that's their personal case. It might have been legal, the contribution itself, but the way the money was earned was illegal. So we have a solid reason to believe that some intelligence officers accompanied and guided these transactions. So we have an interest of questioning them. But we can that could be a first step, and we can also extend it. Options abound, and they all can be found in an appropriate legal framework.
Trump to win the election? And did you direct any of your officials to help him do that?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Because he talked about bringing the US-Russia relationship back to normal.
Продолжаем. Я думаю, вполне вопроса 3 может задать кто-то из российского пула.
I think there can be 3 questions from the Russian pool. Russia Today, you have the floor.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much.
Добрый вечер. Меня зовут
Good evening to everyone. My name is Ilya Petrenko.
Телеканал RT.
RT TV channel.
For Mr. Trump in English. Mr. President, would you please go into the details of possibly any specific arrangements for the U.S. to work together with Russia in Syria, if any of these kind of arrangements were made today or discussed? И, если позволите, Владимир Владимирович, тоже вопрос на русском.
My question to President Putin in Russian. Since we brought up the issue of football several times, I used the football language. Mr. Pompeo mentioned that when we talk about the Syrian cooperation, the ball is in the Syrian court. Mr. Putin, in the Russian court, is it true? And how would you use this fact, the having the ball?
Well, I guess I'll answer the first part of the question. We've worked with Israel long and hard for many years, many decades. I think we've never has any country been closer than we are. President Putin also is helping Israel, and we both spoke with Bibi Netanyahu, and they would like to do certain things with respect to Syria, having to do with the safety of Israel. So in that respect, we absolutely would like to work in order to help Israel, and Israel will be working with us. So both countries would work jointly. And I think that when you look at all of the progress that's been made in certain sections with the eradication of ISIS, we're about 98%, 99% there, and other things that have taken place that we've done, and that, frankly, Russia has helped us with in certain respects. But I think that working with Israel is a great thing, and creating safety for Israel is something that both President Putin and I would like to see very much. One little thing I might add to that is the helping of people. Helping of people, because you have such horrible, if you see, and I've seen reports and I've seen pictures, I've seen just about everything. And if we can do something to help the people of Syria get back into some form of shelter and on a humanitarian basis, and that's what the word was, really, a humanitarian basis. I think that both of us would be very interested in doing that, and we will do that. Okay? Thank you very much.
Excuse me, but for now, no specific agreements, for instance, between the militaries?
Well, our militaries do get along. In fact, our militaries actually have gotten along probably better than our political leaders for years, but our militaries do get along very well, and they do coordinate in Syria and other places. Okay? Thank you.
Yes, we did mention this. We mentioned the humanitarian track of this issue. Yesterday I discussed this with French President Mr. Macron, and we reached an agreement that together with European countries, including France, we will step up this effort. On our behalf, we provide military cargo aircraft to deliver the humanitarian cargo. And today I brought up this issue with President Trump. I think there is plenty of things to look into. The crucial thing here is that a huge amount of refugees are in Turkey, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in the states that border are adjacent to Syria. If we help them, the migratory pressure upon the European states will be decreased manifold. And I believe it's crucial from any point of view, from humanitarian point of view, from the point of view of helping people, helping the refugees. And in general, I agree, I concur with President Trump. Our military cooperate quite successfully together. They do get along, and I hope they will be able to do so in future. We will keep working in the Astana format, I mean Russia, Turkey and Iran, which I informed President Trump about. But we do stand ready to link these efforts to the so-called small group of states, so that the process would be a broader one, it would be a multidimensional one, and so that we will be able to maximize our fighting chance to get the ultimate success in the issue of Syria. And speaking about having the ball in our court in Syria, President Trump has just mentioned that we've successfully concluded the World Football Cup. Speaking of the football, actually, Mr. President, I'll give this ball to you, and now the ball is in your court. All the more that the United States will host the World Cup in 2026.
Thank you. That's right. Thank you very much. We do host it, and we hope we do as good a job. That's very nice. That will go to my son, Barron. We have no question. In fact, Melania, here you go. Okay.
The final question from the United States will go to Jonathan Lemire from the AP.
Thank you. Question for each president. President Trump, yes. You first. Just now, President Putin denied having anything to do with the election interference in 2016. Every U.S. intelligence agency has concluded that Russia did. My first question for you, sir, is who do you believe? My second question is, would you now, with the whole world watching, tell President Putin, would you denounce what happened in 2016, and would you warn him to never do it again?
So let me just say that we have two thoughts. You have groups that are wondering why the FBI never took the server. Why haven't they taken the server? Why was the FBI told to leave the office of the Democratic National Committee? I've been wondering that. I've been asking that for months and months, and I've been tweeting it out and calling it out on social media. Where is the server? I want to know, where is the server, and what is the server saying? With that being said, all I can do is ask the question. My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be, but I really do want to see the server. But I have confidence in both parties. I really believe that this will probably go on for a while, but I don't think it can go on without finding out what happened to the server. What happened to the servers of the Pakistani gentleman that worked on the DNC? Where are those servers? They're missing. Where are they? What happened to Hillary Clinton's emails? 33,000 emails gone, just gone. I think in Russia they wouldn't be gone so easily. I think it's a disgrace that we can't get Hillary Clinton's 33,000 emails. So I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today. And what he did is an incredible offer. He offered to have the people working on the case come and work with their investigators with respect to the 12 people. I think that's an incredible offer. Okay? Thank you.
I'd like to add something to this. After all, I was an intelligence officer myself. And I do know how dossiers are made up. Just a second. That's the first thing. Now the second thing. I believe that Russia is a democratic state, and I hope you're not denying this right to your own country. You're not denying that United States is a democracy. Do you believe United States is a democracy? And if so, if it is a democratic state, then the final conclusion in this kind of a dispute can only be delivered by a trial, by the court, not by the executive, by the law enforcement. For instance, the Concord company that was brought up is being accused. It's been accused of interference. But this company does not constitute the Russian state. It does not represent the Russian state. And I brought several examples before. Well, you have a lot of individuals in the United States, take George Soros, for instance, with multi-billion capitals. But does that make him, his position, his posture, the posture of the United States? No, it does not. Well, it's the same case. There is the issue of trying a case in the court. And the final say is for the court to deliver. We are now talking about the private, the individuals, and not about particular states. And as far as the most recent allegation is concerned about the Russian intelligence officers, we do have an intergovernmental treaty. Please do send us the request. We will analyze it properly and will send a formal response. And as I said, we can extend this cooperation, but we should do it on a reciprocal basis, because we would await our Russian counterparts to provide us access to the persons of interest for us, who we believe can have something to do with the intelligence services. Let's discuss the specific issues and not use the Russia and the US relationship as a loose change for this internal political struggle.
A question for President Putin. Thank you. Two questions for you, sir. Can you tell me what President Trump may have indicated to you about officially recognizing Crimea as part of Russia? And then secondly, sir, does the Russian government have any compromising material on President Trump or his family?
President Trump and, posture of President Trump on Crimea is well known, and he stands firmly by it. He continued to maintain that it was illegal to annex it. Our viewpoint is different. We held a referendum in strict compliance with the UN Charter and the international legislation. For us, this issue, we put paid to this issue. And now to the compromising material. Yeah, I did hear these rumors that we allegedly collected compromising material on Mr. Trump when he was visiting Moscow. Well, distinguished colleague, let me tell you this. When President Trump visited Moscow back then, I didn't even know that he was in Moscow. I treat President Trump with utmost respect. But back then, when he was a private individual, a businessman, nobody informed me that he was in Moscow. Well, let's take St. Petersburg Economic Forum, for instance. There were over 500 American businessmen, the high-ranking, the high-level ones. I don't even remember the last names of each and every one of them. Well, do you think that we try to collect compromising material on each and every single one of them? Well, it's difficult to imagine another nonsense of a bigger scale than this. Well, please just disregard these issues and don't think about this anymore again.
And I have to say, if they had it, it would have been out long ago. And if anybody watched Peter Strzok testify over the last couple of days, and I was in Brussels watching it. It was a disgrace to the FBI. It was a disgrace to our country. And you would say that was a total witch hunt. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
So there we are, President Putin and President Trump leaving the podium after a long day together, over 90 minutes meeting one-on-one and then later meeting with their two teams, and an awful lot coming out of that press conference. Some real interesting detail, particularly when it comes to Robert Mueller's investigation in the United States. Let's just go through some of the things that President Trump had to say about it. He said, I'd rather take the political risks, he said. First of all, talking to President Putin, we've seen in the past, through the Cold War period, the benefits of cooperation. I did raise with him, he said, the Russian interference in our elections. We spent a lot of time talking about it. He feels very strongly about it, he said, and maybe he will want to do something about it. He went on to talk about President Putin as a good competitor, a compliment, he said, rather than someone who he might consider an adversary. And when he was asked in the press conference, do you hold Russia accountable for what went on in the 2016 elections, he said, I hold both countries responsible. We've all been foolish. We've all been to blame here. I do feel that both sides made some mistakes. And then, of course, he returned, as he has returned many times, to his refrain that there was no collusion. It is worth just saying, as an aside, that so far Robert Mueller's investigation has indicted 5 Americans, 1 Dutch, 26 Russian nationals, 3 Russian businesses, and of those 5 that have pleaded guilty so far, of those indicted, I should say, 5 have pleaded guilty. Of course, Paul Manafort, his former campaign director, is currently awaiting trial. From President Putin, he said right at the outset that he had been asked by President Trump about the interference in the 2016 election, that there were concerns from the American side. He said, we have never interfered in US internal affairs, and any specific material that the American side has, we can analyze together. It's much like the Russian position over the alleged Novichok poisoning in Salisbury and the alleged involvement of the Russian side, that they want to be part of the investigation. It'd be interesting to hear the response from the American side later in the day. But the idea that the Americans are going to hand over some of their intelligence and provide people for the Russian side to interview, I don't think that's likely to happen. There is, of course, within the administration a lot of, well, no trust, a lack of trust on the two sides. One other interesting thing, he talked about Dan Coates. Remember, this is President Trump's National Intelligence Director, his Chief Intelligence Officer, and he was asked what he made of the comments from Dan Coates this week, that the red lights were flashing on the dashboard, that they had real concerns that the Russians might interfere in the midterm elections and in future elections. He said, Dan Coates says they think it is Russia. I don't see any reason why it would be. And then he returned to the issue of Hillary Clinton's server, which he's done many times before, talking about the FBI investigation into Hillary Clinton's 33,000 emails. President Putin saying several times that there is a treaty between the two sides which would ensure that they could send material to the Russian side, that they could hold a joint investigation, and that the only way to get to the bottom of what happened in 2016 was to come to a verdict through the courts. But plenty of other things discussed in that press conference. So let's bring in our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who was also watching with me. Let's talk about an area that you know well, Syria. What did you take out of it?
Well, they didn't go into very many details. President Putin said that President Trump paid a great deal of attention to what was happening in southern Syria. President Trump mentioned the importance of talking to Israel about it. They also talked about the importance of saving hundreds of thousands of lives. So Syria was definitely part of their discussions, but we didn't get that much clear as to, did they make a deal about President Putin would like to curb Iran's influence? It was noticeable that President Putin praised the Iran nuclear deal with President Trump standing behind it. President Trump, who was determined to rip up the deal, and indeed he did. So we don't have enough details, but we do know, and we'll have to wait for more, for greater details to see exactly how they're going to move on from this. Of course, many would say it's very late in the crisis. Yes, it's great that they're both talking about it now, but Syrians, I think, would say, well, you should have done this a lot longer ago.
Yeah, he talked about setting up working groups, not only on Syria, but on business, bringing captains of business together. There will be a lot of people, I think, watching in the United States that would say, well, let's walk before we run. There is clearly, as I was just saying, a trust deficit between the two sides. How do you think the tenor of the US president is going to go down at home?
There will be shock. There'll be shock. There were gasps among the journalists listening to this news conference. He was pressed repeatedly by the journalists on Russia. Tell us what you hold Russia responsible for. He blamed the both sides. Tell us, do you believe that there was any Russian involvement in the U.S. elections? 3 U.S. intelligence agencies, plus a Senate committee, all said that there was Russian collusion. President Trump again blamed both sides. He basically said that he believed President Putin as much, if not more, than he believed his own intelligence agencies. Yeah. And when you talk about where they will go from here, it was breathtaking. It was very Trumpian in its sort of sweeping assessment of that he has a right to say that this is in keeping with a bold tradition of American diplomacy that could help change the world. I think everyone would agree to that. But in the same way that when he came out of his meeting with the North Korean leader and said the North Korean nuclear threat is over, he came out of this one and said, 4 hours ago, our terrible relations between Russia and the United States have changed. Yeah. Because I have sat down with President Putin and had this conversation, things are completely different now, and they're going to keep being different. We're going to set up these working groups, and it's going to be all changed now. I think we would want to believe that this is the beginning of what both said was a great conversation. But as the details kept spilling out, I think more and more people found it very hard to believe the President of the United States refused to side with his own administration to raise any of the concerns. He didn't talk about Crimea, for example. It was President Putin who said, he said that we disagree. But President Trump himself, when asked about this, did not talk about Crimea, the annexation of Crimea in 2014. He did not talk about Ukraine. There was a lot that he said that will raise questions certainly back in the United States. His supporters may, of course, back him, but in the foreign policy establishment there will be questions. But what he left out was as equally breathtaking.
Yes, and we've heard this before, of course. We heard it after the meeting in Singapore with Kim Jong-un, that it was an overwhelming success. And then when we look at the detail, there is very little there. And of course, we've had little detail in the weeks that followed. Stay with me, because I just want to show people a little bit of the press conference if they're just joining us. Let's hear from both Vladimir Putin and from President Trump during the conference.
We had direct, open, deeply productive dialogue. Went very well. Before I begin, I want to thank President Niinisto of Finland for graciously hosting today's summit. President Putin and I were saying how lovely it was and what a great job they did. I also want to congratulate Russia and President Putin for having done such an excellent job in hosting the World Cup. It was really one of the best ever, and your team also did very well. It was a great job. I'm here today to continue the proud tradition of bold American diplomacy. From the earliest days of our republic, American leaders have understood that diplomacy and engagement is preferable to conflict and hostility. A productive dialogue is not only good for the United States and good for Russia, but it is good for the world. The disagreements between our two countries are well known, and President Putin and I discussed them at length today. But if we're going to solve many of the problems facing our world, then we're going to have to find ways to cooperate in pursuit of shared interests. Too often in both recent past and long ago, We have seen the consequences when diplomacy is left on the table. We have also seen the benefits of cooperation. In the last century, our nations fought alongside one another in the Second World War. Even during the tensions of the Cold War, when the world looked much different than it does today, the United States and Russia were able to maintain a strong dialogue. But our relationship has never been worse than it is now. However, that changed as of about 4 hours ago. I really believe that. Nothing would be easier politically than to refuse to meet, to refuse to engage, but that would not accomplish anything. As president, I cannot make decisions on foreign policy in a futile effort to appease partisan critics or the media or Democrats who want to do nothing but resist and obstruct. Constructive dialogue between the United States and Russia affords the opportunity to open new pathways toward peace and stability in our world. I would rather take a political risk in pursuit of peace than to risk peace in pursuit of politics. As president, I will always put what is best for America and what is best for the American people.
So that was President Trump speaking at the press conference just a few moments ago. Let's just hear a little bit of what President Putin had to say.
In general, we are glad with the outcome of our first full-scale meeting, because previously we only had a chance to talk briefly on international fora. We had a good conversation with President Trump, and I hope that we start to understand each other better, and I'm grateful to Donald for it. Clearly, there are some challenges left when we were not able to clear all the backlog, but I think that we made the first important step in this direction. And in conclusion, I want to...
President Putin speaking just a few minutes ago. Let's bring in Alexander Hook. He is the deputy head of mission of the OSCE. He is been watching some of this press conference as well. Alexander Hook, can I talk to you about Ukraine first of all? Tomorrow is the 4th anniversary of the shooting down of the Malaysian airliner, but no reference from Donald Trump to that and no reference to it from Vladimir Putin.
Good afternoon. The special monitoring mission of the OSCE has been documenting the violence since it started more than 4 years ago. We have not had a single day we found that we had been registering a ceasefire violation. In fact, last year alone, we had been registering over 401,000 ceasefire violations. This year, to date, this number stays over 150. The ongoing violence has taken a toll on the civilian population, severely so. Last year, over 480 civilian casualties the mission had been confirming. This year, that number is over 150 civilian casualties. It has to be said, though, that since a latest recommitment that started on the 1st of July this year, when the signatories of the Minsk agreements, Russia, Ukraine, and certain areas of Donetsk and Luhansk region agreed to recommit to an already agreed ceasefire, the numbers went down from 4-digit numbers on single days to 2 or 3 digits in the past 2 weeks. So that's a positive development. But it's on very thin ice, and unless the real measures are being implemented as they have agreed in Minsk, including the withdrawal of heavy weapons and disengaging forces where they stand close, this will be yet again short-lived.
You said that there'd been a recommitment to the Minsk objectives. In that press conference, President Putin said that he wanted the Americans to lean on the Ukrainian side. Would you say that the Ukrainians have done enough on their side, or is there some more work for the Ukrainians to do?
All involved here have to further conduct dialogue. Ultimately, this conflict can only be resolved through dialogue. And what I do think is important, and we have seen this on the ground and see it on a daily basis, that when the signatories to the agreement would take the civilian concerns first, then measures would automatically come that would improve the situation. Unfortunately now, a military logic is still reigning, this almost 500-kilometer long contact line, and is not yet replaced by civilian logic. And until that is changing, I'm afraid we will be continuing to documenting the violence there in the eastern part of the country.
Okay, Alexander Hug, thank you very much indeed. As we were saying, President Putin said there are differences between the two sides, and specifically when it comes to Crimea, he said that that Donald Trump had recommitted to the signed communique from last week's NATO summit, that the takeover of Crimea was illegal in his view and could not be accepted. The Russian side said that they had held a referendum according to UN conventions, and that as far as they were concerned, Crimea remains part of Russia. So that is one area where there is obviously a major difference. It didn't appear that there was much progress on Ukraine either.